The Milwaukee serial killer known as Jeffrey Dahmer is also known as both a serial killer and cannibal for 13 years. His reign of terror has already come to an end, but his crimes are never forgotten. There is still so much creepy facts, and this video will look at 10 of those creepy facts you won't believe. Make sure you wait until number 1 to see the creepiest fact of all. Number 10, his father showed him how to preserve corpses. It is no surprise to anyone familiar with Dahmer's crimes that during childhood, he had a collection of animal corpses which he kept in his clubhouse. He was 4 years old when he started collecting animal bones because he was fascinated by how they would, in his words, fit together. He also killed many of these animals himself. His scientist father, who wanted to bond with his distant son, decided to appease his childhood curiosity by showing Dahmer how to clean and preserve animal parts properly. With this technique learned from his father, Dahmer would later use it to preserve the body parts of his victims, which he kept in his apartment. According to Malcolm Plant, the author of the book Making the Link, it is highly likely that an animal abuser will also be abusing humans. We found not only have most animal abusers been exposed to abuse and violence, but that this has resulted in reduced empathy and a normalization of aggression. Number 9. Jeffrey Dahmer intended to build an altar out of the remains of his victims. During the hours of his interviews conducted after being captured in 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer confessed that he had a plan to use the remains of the victims he collected to make an altar to himself. He even went as far as having very specific plans on setting it up with 10 different skulls and skeletons. This very specific plan and details were displayed via the photographs he took of his victims and in a drawing featuring 2 full skeletons and several skulls, all which were to be in his apartment with a chair facing the shrine, making it, according to him, a place for meditation and an area where he could feel at home. He was, however, caught before his plans were finally realized. Number 8. He committed his first murder at the age of 18. Jeffrey Dahmer's parents were granted a divorce in 1978, following their accusing each other of extreme cruelty and gross neglect of duty. A former neighbor by the name Susan Lair said of Dahmer's childhood, "When I knew him, there was something devastating going on in his life, and there was nobody there to help him. I feel bad about that." Following the divorce, Dahmer's mother moved out of the town with his younger brother, while his father also left the family home. Jeffrey Dahmer was left all alone. He then started drinking heavily, and at the age of 18, he committed his first murder on June 18, 1978. He brought a hitchhiker named Steve Hicks back to the house where he choked and hit him to death with a sledgehammer. According to Dahmer, the guy wanted to leave, and I did not want him to leave. He scattered the bones in his yard afterwards, and more than a decade later, police were able to recover more than 500 pieces of bone in his yard. Number 7. He was suspected of killing Adam Walsh. Jeffrey Dahmer is suspected of killing Adam Walsh based on the eyewitness accounts of the horrifying day Adam Walsh disappeared. Some people now believe that little Adam might have fallen victim to the cannibalistic killer after he was discharged from the military in March 1981. Jeffrey Dahmer decided to move to Miami, Florida, instead of returning home to Ohio. He worked in a deli, but ended up living on the beach and spent more of his time drinking. When the news of his crimes came out in 1991, reports came in from eyewitnesses who allegedly saw him at Florida's Hollywood Mall in July 1981, the same place where little Adam Walsh went missing. 4 people who were at the mall identified him after he was arrested by Milwaukee police. Dahmer, however, denied any involvement, and since he had just admitted to killing 17 over a span of about 13 years, investigators found it quite unlikely that he would lie about committing any further crimes. Number 6. He allegedly raped soldiers while in the military. 6 weeks after he murdered Stephen Hicks, Dahmer enrolled at Ohio State University with hopes of majoring in business. His alcoholism, however, meant that he only achieved low grades, and he dropped out just after 3 months. His father encouraged him to join the United States Army in 1979, where he trained as a medical specialist. During his time in the military, 2 soldiers came forward with the claims that they had been drugged and raped by Dahmer. He was deemed unfit for military service in 1981 and received an honorable discharge. Preston Davis, who was in the military at the same time as Jeffrey Dahmer, recalled that he would get drunk in the barracks and say, "I killed the guy in Ohio." They would reply with, "You didn't kill nobody." This was after he had killed his first victim a year before joining the military. Number 5. Jeffrey Dahmer received a lot of money in prison. As hard as it is to believe, there are many people out in the world who idolize serial killers. Dahmer was not exempted, just as we see in the Netflix series Monster Dahmer, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. He received fan letters with gifts, money, and requests for drawings. According to the Wisconsin-Columbia Correctional Institution records, Dahmer managed to save up thousands of dollars while in prison. By March 1994, the imprisoned serial killer had received letters from all over the globe, reportedly having as much as $12,000. Even more than that, it was just from donations. While some letters were of the suggestive nature, others reached out to him because they wanted to discuss religion, provide support, or just be pen pals. Number 4. He tried to turn some of his victims into zombies. Dr. Frederick Fostel is a forensic psychologist who was hired by prosecutors to examine Dahmer. He found out that the serial killer had carried out lobotomies on some of his victims' corpses. He did this by drilling holes in their heads and pouring fluid in the skulls. He also injected them with muriatic acid while they were alive to see if he could keep them under his control. He had also hoped to control and keep them around longer by making them zombie-like. He also confessed to having sex with some of the corpses and even preserving one man's heart to eat. The psychiatrist also didn't find anything in his examination to support Dahmer's plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. It was clear that Jeffrey Dahmer knew his crimes were evil, but still chose to carry out the gruesome murders. Number 3. He brought human remains to work. In March of 1989, while Dahmer lived with his grandmother, he went to a bar and convinced one of his soon-to-be victims, Anthony Sears, to come home with him. After engaging in intimate acts, Dahmer drugged and beheaded Sears, though the killer claimed he had not intended to commit a crime. Before setting out for work in the evening, Dahmer kept both Sears' head and private parts in a box. He stored that box in his locker at the Milwaukee Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, where he worked most nights as a mixer. Human remains inside a chocolate factory is not something anyone would find appealing, but not for the serial killer. That was how strong and bizarre the desire was to keep something of his dead victims with him. Number 2. He had a victim count of 17. Dahmer's total victim count was 17. He would select men who were vulnerable runaways, hitchhikers, or drug dealers, people whom their disappearance were less likely to be reported right away. He would then strangle his victims, keeping the body parts as souvenirs and taking photos of the dismembered corpses. His first murders took place in the basement of his grandmother's house. She was not aware of his crimes, but eventually grew tired of the late-night drunkenness and kicked him out. He then moved out and in just 2 years. His victim count rose from 4 to 17. Number 1. His parents fought over his brain. The disturbing nature of Jeffrey Dahmer's unspeakable crimes made him a particularly fascinating serial killer, and his mother Joyce felt studying how his mind worked could potentially find an answer as to why he had these violent desires after his death. He was indeed the ideal subject for criminal psychology research. In November 1994, she wanted his brain donated to scientists at California's Fresno State University for research purposes. His father, Lionel, was however against it, wanting to move on from the whole tragedy. The ex-married couple went to court over the issue, which ultimately resulted in his brain being destroyed. Which one of these do you find the creepiest? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to see more videos like this, please turn on all notifications and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.